The boy who lived isn't Harry Potter. What if the wizarding world's most famous scar wasn't on Harry Potter's forehead? What if the lightning bolt that defined an era burned itself into the skin of Neville Longbottom instead? Today, we deconstruct a timeline where the boy who lived isn't Harry at all. Picture the familiar image: a baby in a crib, a dark figure in the doorway, green light about to rewrite history. In canon, we instinctively place that crib in Godric's Hollow, but shift the camera. The nursery is in the Longbottom home, not the Potter's cottage. The walls are lined with Auror commendations, not Quidditch photos. Frank and Alice, not James and Lily, turn toward the scream. The core issue is mechanical. The prophecy never singled out Harry by name. It offered Voldemort a choice between two children, born at the end of July, to parents who had defied him 3 times. In this fractured reality, the Dark Lord walks up a different path, through a different garden, and raises his wand over a different child. The divergence is finalized the moment he steps across the Longbottom threshold. What does that single decision rewrite? For one, Harry Potter becomes a boy who merely survived, not the boy who lived. Neville becomes the axis around which fear and hope rotate. Every headline, every whispered story in Diagon Alley, every bedtime tale about the night Voldemort fell now carries the name Longbottom as both shield and target. In the original series, Neville is the awkward background presence, round-faced, forgetful, perpetually losing his toad and his self-confidence. He blooms late, under the pressure of war and the quiet loyalty of friends. But reality bends when you stamp a legend on a baby's forehead. Imagine that same child, raised from day one as the wizarding world's symbolic weapon. His grandmother does not simply demand he live up to the family name. The entire social structure of magical Britain does. The subtext is brutal. A boy built for greenhouses and quiet corridors is forced into prophecy and public scrutiny. Every miscast spell becomes a headline. Every stumble is a national anxiety attack. Does fame crush his gentleness, grinding it into brittle perfectionism? Or does it forge a different category of hero, one whose power is not bravado, but endurance? Because Neville's strengths were always psychological more than theatrical. Resilience, empathy, the capacity to stand and shake and still not sit down. When that is the template for the Chosen One, the dynamic of the war shifts. Dumbledore mentors a child who does not resemble James Potter at all. Snape's hatred has nowhere easy to land. Harry grows up adjacent to the legend rather than inside it, and that single displacement fractures his entire identity. Across this episode, we walk year by year through Hogwarts, from the attack on the Longbottoms to the Battle of Hogwarts, and we watch the structure of the saga twist around a Chosen One Neville. How does first year unfold when it is Neville facing the mirror of Erised or Voldemort in the forest? Who grasps the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries? When the turning point arrives in the final battle, who stands where, holding which sword, making which impossible choice? By the end, we will have tracked not just Neville's transformation, but the collateral evolution of Harry, Voldemort, and the entire war. To get there, we start at the only place that matters in any alternate timeline: the night the scar is made. Rewriting the prophecy. Why Neville was always eligible. To understand why Neville can carry the scar, we have to do something very boring and very necessary. We deconstruct a timeline by grammar. Sybil Trelawney's prophecy, stripped of mystic cadence, is brutally clear. A child will be born as the 7th month dies. That child's parents will have defied Voldemort 3 times. He will be marked as his equal and possess the power to vanquish him. That is the mechanical structure of the sentence, and the core issue is mechanical. Nowhere does the prophecy name Harry Potter. Frank and Alice Longbottom, James and Lily Potter, 2 Aurors and an ex-Auror couple, both in the original Order of the Phoenix, both having faced Voldemort and his forces at least 3 times. Neville, born July 30th, Harry, born July 31st. Both families satisfy every clause. The prophecy does not choose between them. Voldemort does. In canon, his reasoning is almost narcissistically simple. He looks at the options and fixates on the half-blood boy raised by muggles, the one whose blood status and fractured home echo his own origin. He recognizes himself in Harry, assumes threat must mirror trauma, and walks into Godric's Hollow to kill a version of Tom Riddle he thinks he understands. The subtext is brutal. Voldemort is trying to murder his own reflection. In this altered reality, one decision slips. Perhaps a Death Eater reports reports that the Longbottoms have been particularly disruptive in recent raids. Perhaps pureblood gossip at Malfoy Manor emphasizes the Longbottom name as an old, stubborn house that will not bend. Perhaps Dumbledore's protection around Godric's Hollow feels marginally more opaque, more dangerous, and this financial technicality forces Voldemort to choose the easier target. The divergence is finalized when he reinterprets the prophecy through ideology instead of biography. Now, he sees not a mirror, but a threat to the entire blood purity narrative. A pure-blood child, heir to a respected line, prophesied to possess a power he cannot comprehend. If Voldemort's public rhetoric is that purebloods are the natural apex of magical power, then a pureblood destined to destroy him is a theological crisis inside his own cult. His inner circle cannot say this aloud, but the psychological fracture is immediate. If the prophecy is true, then either blood purity produces its own executioner, or Voldemort is not the inevitable endpoint of that ideology. This is where the war's theme tilts. With Harry as the chosen one, the conflict appears to be magic versus muggles, wizards versus non-believers, the magical world defending itself from a genocidal tyrant. With Neville as the chosen one, the war becomes civil, pure blood against pure blood. The Longbottom's loyalty to the old, duty-bound structure of the wizarding world stands in direct opposition to the Death Eater's vision of hereditary terror. Every duel between Auror and Death Eater becomes a family argument about what pure blood power is for. So we arrive at the night itself, not Godric's Hollow, the Longbottom home, a door, a wand, a prophecy echoing in the Dark Lord's mind, now contaminated by fear of a pure-blood usurper. Freeze the frame as Voldemort steps over the threshold. In the next section, we slow this moment down until every decision, every spell, every scream is visible, and we watch the timeline split in real time. The night at Longbottom Manor, when the timeline shatters, unfreeze the frame. Longbottom Manor is not warm, it is dignified. High ceilings, ancestral portraits, and the precise silence of an old pureblood house that has survived every previous war by never admitting it was afraid. The war is out there, in alleyways and safe houses and whispered passwords. In here, the carpets still muffle footsteps, the tea tray still rattles on its saucer, and a baby named Neville breathes in small, uncertain bursts. Then the doorbell rings. Not a crash, not an explosion, a polite chime that weaponizes etiquette. This is Voldemort's first cruelty. He forces the Longbottoms to walk toward their own annihilation. Frank's hand tightens on his wand. Alice's eyes meet his for half a second, and the unspoken calculation passes between two seasoned Aurors who have already defied this man 3 times. Do they run? Do they hide? They know the prophecy exists, even if they do not know its exact wording. They understand that somewhere, in some drafty office, Dumbledore is praying this door never opens. The core issue is mechanical. Wards are built for raids, not for the Dark Lord himself, and Longbottom Manor has been optimized for social status, not siege warfare. When the door swings inward, the air changes temperature. Magic hums at a frequency that wakes Neville in his cot. Voldemort does not waste words. No monologue, no theatrics. He acknowledges Frank and Alice as threats, not obstacles, and the duel that erupts in the front hall is nothing like Godric's Hollow. 2 trained Aurors against 1 Dark Lord. Spells ricochet off marble, portraits scream, glass disintegrates under shattering hexes. Frank drives Voldemort backward with a brutal sequence of jinxes that would have felled most Death Eaters by the 3rd impact. Alice layers shields, transfigures furniture into moving barricades, turns the genteel architecture of the manor into a temporary fortress. For a moment, the timeline wavers. You can almost see a version of reality where they win. The turning point arrives in a whisper. Voldemort stops testing and starts executing. He disarms Alice with a curse that tears through her shield as if it were parchment. Frank falters, just once, at the sound of her body hitting the floor. That single human flinch is all the fracture requires. Voldemort steps over them and walks toward the nursery. Here, the subtext is brutal. He is not killing Neville because of who Neville is, but because of what a sentence in a prophecy suggested he might become. power, in this moment, is preemptive murder. The killing curse flashes green. In this timeline, the rebound is not quiet. When the curse collapses inward and detonates outward, Longbottom Manor becomes an epicenter. The blast slams through stone, strips wallpaper, and sears a jagged lightning bolt scar into Neville's forehead. More than that, it imprints the prophecy into the very air, a magical shockwave that tells the world something impossible has happened here. We do not stay to catalog bodies. We are denied that comfort. The narrative camera pulls back through smoke and Auror fire calls, past healers apparating into the ruins, until we find Augusta Longbottom standing in St. Mungo's corridor, back iron straight, hat askew, eyes that have run out of tears. Has she lost a son and daughter-in-law to death, or to a fate worse than death in the Janus Thicky ward? The divergence is finalized by what we are not allowed to see. All we know is that the healers place a scarred baby in her arms, and in that instant, Neville becomes both grandson and symbol, both family and headline. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated. By morning, the Daily Prophet has its banner, "The Boy Who Lived, Neville Longbottom." Pure-blood drawing rooms whisper about the Longbottom line, about prophecies, about whether Dumbledore has chosen his champion. In the corridor light, Neville's scar glows faintly as he sleeps, unaware that the entire wizarding world is recalibrating around his existence. We cut away before we learn who survived that night, because the next question is not who died. It is what this baby's survival forces everyone else to become. Growing up, famous, Neville's childhood under the Longbottoms. So what does a childhood look like when the entire country is already waiting for your climactic duel? In canon, Neville's early years are almost urban legend. The baby dropped out of a Blackpool window to test whether he has magic, the boy whose relatives pass him around at family gatherings, quietly terrified that he is a squib. His trauma is small-scale, domestic, and humiliating. Here, the fracture is public. Every accidental levitation, every burst of accidental magic is not a family anecdote. It is front-page confirmation that the boy who lived is still on track. The core issue is mechanical. Fame arrives before personality. The Longbottom home, already a pureblood stronghold, becomes a quasi-museum. Reporters linger at the garden gate. Photographers try to capture a glimpse of the scar beneath his fringe. When toddler Neville makes a toy broom wobble, it is not a sweet milestone. It is an emergency owl from the Prophet asking for a quote and a statement from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Augusta Longbottom, in this timeline, is not just a strict grandmother. She is the guardian of a legend whose failure would be a national embarrassment. Her loyalty to the family name fuses with a new, weaponized anxiety. Manners are not optional, they are political. Neville learns which fork to use at ministry banquets before he learns the names of all his toys. He is drilled on goblin rebellions at an age when Canon Neville was still being dangled out of windows. Under that regime, his magical development accelerates and distorts at the same time. Private tutors arrive before he can read fluently. Healers from St. Mungo's run routine assessments, measuring his magical core, charting his power on confidential reports that never stay confidential for long. A miscast lumos that singes the curtains becomes a whispered question in the atrium. Is the boy who lived unstable? When he fails to summon a cushion on command, Augusta's jaw tightens, not because he is clumsy, but because she can already hear tomorrow's headline. The subtext is brutal. Neville's central fear in canon is, what if I'm not magical enough? Here, that anxiety mutates into something more corrosive. What if I disappoint everyone? Every stumble is a betrayal. Every tear during a lesson feels treasonous. He is not allowed to be late blooming because the timeline the adults worship does not have room for delay. We deconstruct a timeline where even play is structured. Wooden swords become practice wands. Storytime becomes tactical briefings about his parents' or heroics. The divergence is finalized the first time he overhears two Order members arguing in the next room, one insisting he needs rest, the other insisting we cannot afford another weak generation. He is 7, and somewhere off-screen, another boy with a matching birth date is being shoved into a cupboard under the stairs. Harry's magic is ignored, suppressed, starved of language. Neville's is monitored, quantified, and overfed with expectation. two childhoods, inverted mirrors, one child erased to preserve a muggle fantasy of normalcy, the other consumed by a magical myth that will not let him be ordinary. The turning point arrives when Hogwarts looms, because the question is no longer whether Neville will be powerful, it is whether he will be allowed to be a person at all. The Hogwarts letters, two boys, two very different doors. Neville Longbottom's Hogwarts letter is never in doubt. It is not a miracle. It is a scheduled event. The morning it arrives, sunlight spills across the polished floors of Longbottom Manor, catching on silver frames of old horrors and older expectations. An owl dips through an already enchanted window. This is not an intrusion, but part of the house's daily circulation system, as routine as the tea tray. Augusta Longbottom is seated, prepared. Reporters from the Daily Prophet have been coincidentally invited for a late morning interview. The envelope itself is ceremonial more than revelatory, heavy parchment, emerald ink. The boy who lived, formally notified that he will attend the school whose safety and power were allegedly proven by his survival. Neville's hand has been guided through this scene for years. He knows how to hold the letter, how to angle the scar to the light, how to answer the question he has already been asked 100 times. "Are you excited, Mr. Longbottom?" He says the rehearsed line. Of course he is excited. Hogwarts is where his parents were heroes, where he will become what the prophecy already declared. The subtext is brutal. This is not an invitation. It is a summons from history. Then the camera cuts. Hard. Number 4, Privet Drive. No reporters, no silver frames. The only photos on the walls have been edited through strategic absence. Harry Potter exists in this house as a labor unit, not a subject of nostalgia. When the first Hogwarts letter slips through the brass mail slot, it does not confirm a mythic narrative. It threatens a carefully engineered fantasy of normality. This is where we deconstruct a timeline you think you know. In canon, Harry's letter is the doorway to destiny. Here, the core issue is mechanical. The letter is simply the Ministry's notification that an unregistered wizard must be educated. There is no prophecy attached to his name, no hidden scar with geopolitical significance, just a boy in an oversized shirt, reading proof that his misery has never been ordinary. Vernon's panic is identical in volume, but different in flavor. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated not by a famous child, but by the realization that they have failed to suppress magic in a disposable one. The barrage of letters escalates. The boarded-up mail slot, the flight to the hut on the rock, Hagrid's entrance, door blasted inward, is still theatrical, but the audience has shifted. Hagrid does not arrive bearing reverence. He arrives with bureaucratic irritation and a sausage. Harry is not a legend to be located. He is a neglected minor to be retrieved. Pattern interrupt. What happens when the giant in the doorway is not announcing a messiah, but offering an escape hatch? Harry steps through that door hungry, not for power, but for a place where he is not a problem to be hidden. His bewilderment is total, his loyalty waiting for the first person who treats him as real. Neville, by contrast, approaches his door to Hogwarts, literal and metaphorical, with the weight of a coronation. Security wards hum around platform 9 3/4. Auras shadow his every movement. Augusta walks half a step behind, never beside. When he boards the Hogwarts Express, compartments rearrange themselves socially around him. The boy who lived at the center, orbiting admirers, hopeful politicians' children, and discreet bodyguards in plain robes. Harry finds a compartment only because no one is looking for him. Trunk dragged by hand, owl cage bumping against his knee, he ends up in an empty space near the back, where the noise of fame is only a distant vibration through the carriage walls. Freeze the frame. Split screen the train as it pulls away. On one side, Neville, laughing on cue, already performing the role of symbol, his every gesture archived in someone's article draft. On the other, Harry, forehead against the cool glass, anonymous and unnoticed, for now. The divergence is finalized not in prophecy, but in seating arrangements. Two boys on the same train, two doors already closed behind them. The real question is which of them will be allowed to choose who they become once Hogwarts stops the world and opens. Diagon Alley and the Wand, forging a different kind of hero. When the train doors close, the next stage opens not at Hogwarts, but in a marketplace that functions as a mirror. Diagon Alley is not just a shopping trip for Neville Longbottom, it is a public unveiling. He steps out of the leaky cauldron into a corridor of color and scrutiny. Shopkeepers pause mid-measurement. Owls ruffle their feathers, sensing the static of concentrated magic around him. Parents nudge their children, whispering, "That's him, the Longbottom boy, the one who lived." Augusta does not flinch under the attention. She advances down the cobblestones with the posture of a general walking her grandson through a future battlefield. Every storefront an outpost, every window a watchtower. The dynamic is brutal. Harry's first Diagon Alley trip is private wonder, a quiet grafting into a hidden world. Neville's is spectacle. He cannot stop being observed. Every robe he tries on, every book he touches, is an event that will be retold over tea in 100 drawing rooms. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated not by a prophecy, but by the simple fact that there is nowhere for Neville to be anonymous. The core issue is mechanical. In canon, Neville's wand is a hand-me-down, his father's relic, a constant reminder that he is failing to live up to a previous generation's standard. Here, that inheritance is delayed. Dumbledore and Augusta insist the boy who lived will go to Ollivanders and be chosen, not equipped, chosen. So the turning point arrives behind a dusty door and a tinkling bell. Only, this is not Harry's almost clandestine visit. There are ministry escorts hovering at the threshold, quills from the prophet scratching outside, and Ollivander himself emerges with an intensity sharpened by awareness of the cameras he pretends not to see. Shelves shudder as Neville enters. Boxes rattle. A few lids pop open of their own accord, as if the wands are arguing over him. Ollivander circles, murmuring about destiny and timelines, fingers trailing through the air near Neville's scar. "Try this," he says, "and that." Hawthorn and dragon heartstring, oak and phoenix feather, combinations that blaze too bright or fizzle into nothing. The performance is exhausting. For Neville, every failed wand is not just a misfit, it is a public test. He appears to be failing. Then a smaller box, almost overlooked, is brought forward. A seemingly unremarkable wand, perhaps 12 inches, slightly springy, of humble ash with a unicorn hair core. No grand phoenix, no exotic rarity. A configuration associated with loyalty, quiet resilience, and magic that holds under pressure rather than dazzles on command. It sits in Ollivander's palm without fanfare. Neville touches it. The reaction is not an explosion. It is a deep, resonant hum that settles into the bones of the shop itself. The lamp steady, the rattling stops. For a heartbeat, Diagon Alley goes still. Ollivander's eyes sharpen. He speaks softly enough that only Neville and Augusta truly hear him. This wand, he notes, has an unusual twin, a brother wand whose allegiance has not yet been fully tested, bound to magic that fractures and reforms reality in ways the Ministry does not understand. The subtext is brutal. This choice will echo when Neville stands before Voldemort again. The same structural bond that tied Harry to Tom in canon now threads through Neville's arm. In that moment, the divergence is finalized on a different axis. The world expected a proud, blazing instrument of power. Neville receives something stubborn, loyal, steady, a tool for endurance, not spectacle. Quietly, his entire heroic template shifts. And as they step back into the roar of Diagon Alley, the question becomes unavoidable. What happens when a world built on legends has to confront a chosen one whose magic is designed not to conquer, but to outlast? Sorting the boy who lived, Neville's house, Neville's identity. What happens when that quiet, endurance-based magic is marched into the loudest ritual of childhood? What happens when the boy who lived has to sit on a stool and wait for a hat to define him? The Great Hall is where the divergence is finalized. Candles hover. The ceiling reflects a storm-dark sky that has nothing on the thunder inside Neville's chest. Whispers fracture the air as Professor McGonagall calls. "Longbottom, Neville." Every eye tracks him. Some children crane for the scar, others for the legend. What they actually see is a boy who nearly trips on the way to the stool, face burning, hands damp. The hat drops over his eyes. The world vanishes. Reality narrows to an old voice in his head and the pressure of 1,000 expectations he never agreed to carry. Well, well, the Sorting Hat murmurs into his thoughts. Powerful legacy here. Auror Parents. Prophecy. Marked by the darkest wizard in a century. Where to put you, Mr. Longbottom? The core issue is mechanical. The hat is not reading the newspapers. It is reading a nervous, traumatized 11-year-old whose magic is wired for endurance, not spectacle. It tastes Slytherin first. Ambition, it suggests, not as glory-seeking, but as obligation, the weight of the Longbottom name, the pressure to restore his parents' honor, the quiet fantasy of one day standing in front of St. Mungo's and undoing what was done. There is ambition in wanting to fix an entire war with your own hands. The subtext is brutal. Slytherin would weaponize that guilt. Ravenclaw flickers next. Neville's careful attention to details in herbology books, his tendency to retreat into thought when conversation overwhelms him, the way he catalogs every adult's expression for danger. There is a reflective, pattern-seeking mind here, trained by childhood trauma to scan for threat. But the hat feels no hunger for abstract knowledge, no joy in theory for its own sake. Hufflepuff surges forward. Loyalty to his parents, to Gran, to the idea that he must be good because others died to keep him alive. A work ethic formed not from pride, but from fear of disappointing the last adult who still believes in him. This is where a Hufflepuff chosen one becomes an intoxicating possibility. Imagine the narrative. The savior of the wizarding world, not as a lion, but as a badger, defined by steadfastness, community, and the slow, relentless defense of the vulnerable. And yet, beneath the shaking hands and the self-doubt, the hat finds something else, buried deep and stubborn, a willingness to stand up when every instinct screams to sit down, the memory of small, almost invisible defiances. Telling Gran he doesn't want to hear that he ought to have been a better Longbottom, stepping between a cousin and a bullied child at a family gathering, even though he was terrified. This is not flashy bravery, it is courage under fear, courage that coexists with trembling knees. That, the hat realizes, is the core of his heroism. Hufflepuff would cradle that loyalty, Gryffindor would test it in fire. Which serves the timeline where Voldemort returns? Which house best aligns with a prophecy about facing a Dark Lord who believes only in naked power? The hat hesitates. We deconstruct a timeline in that pause. In one branch, a Hufflepuff Neville builds power through community, reshaping Hogwarts' social structure from the basement up. In another, a Gryffindor Neville is forced to confront danger directly, accelerating the maturation of that buried courage. The turning point arrives here, Mr. Longbottom, the hat whispers. You'll need to be brave. The word resonates, not as praise, but as assignment. Gryffindor! The roar detonates around him. Red and gold banners blur through his tears of relief and terror. At the Gryffindor table, a skinny, unknown first year named Harry Potter claps along with everyone else, watching the boy who lived shuffle to his seat, shoulders hunched, cheeks flushed. Harry expected a legend. He gets a nervous boy, and in that dissonance, the next fracture in this reality quietly opens. Year 1. Rewritten, Neville, Harry, and the Philosopher's Stone. Harry expected a legend. He gets a nervous boy. Neville expected Hogwarts to fix him. It amplifies him instead. From the first morning, his reality is a contradiction in motion. Older students whisper and point in the Great Hall. First years hover at the edges of his bench, desperate to ask about the night Voldemort fell. Yet when he tries to butter toast, his knife skids, his sleeve knocks over pumpkin juice, and the boy who lived ends up drenched in his own breakfast. Applause turns to awkward silence. The subtext is brutal. They wanted a symbol of power, not a clumsy 11-year-old trying not to cry. Academically, the fracture widens. McGonagall softens her voice, marking his transfiguration essays with gentle encouragement and quiet references to his parents' or her brilliance. Snape does the opposite. He does not see James Potter's face. He sees a Longbottom who survived where Lily did not, and that is its own psychological trigger. He overcorrects. Every mischopped root is a public indictment. Every stammered answer becomes, in Snape's hands, a referendum on whether the chosen one is actually competent. The core issue is mechanical. No one knows how to teach a legend who still forgets which pocket holds his wand. Into this unstable structure walk Harry and Hermione. Harry, no longer the boy who lived, becomes the boy who watches. He recognizes the flinch when adults say your name too loudly, the way fame can be a cage. He helps Neville tie his tie before their first flying lesson, muttering that he hates heights too. Hermione, meanwhile, approaches Neville with ruthless academic clarity. She does not gush over his scar. She shoves a timetable into his hands, organizes his notes, and tells him, in the same tone she uses on herself, that being bad at something now does not mean he will be bad forever. Then the broom leaves the ground. In canon, the flying lesson is Harry's debut. Here, it is Neville's public stress test. His broom jerks, panics with him, and when he shoots upward, the entire school holds its breath for the boy who lived. He falls anyway. The difference is who moves. Harry is the one who sprints toward him, not to show off, but to check if the legend can still breathe. When the troll enters the dungeon, the timeline bends again. In this version, it is not about rescuing an isolated Hermione, it is about protecting the magical asset of the war. Quirrell, already fixated on the child who ended his master, steers the chaos toward Neville's corridor. Neville freezes at the smell, at the sound of stone cracking under the troll's club. His fear is not death, it is failing the story written about him. Yet in that paralysis, one small motion, he shoves Harry sideways, taking the brunt of falling rubble on his shoulder. A minor act, mechanically, a massive one, psychologically. Dumbledore sees all of this and calibrates his protections accordingly. The enchanted chessboard guarding the Philosopher's Stone is no longer a stage for Harry's instinctive heroics. It is tuned to Neville's hesitations and loyalties. The pieces require cooperation, not solo bravado. The logic is cruel and precise. Force the boy who lived to trust others, or lose. The Forbidden Forest detention crystallizes the divergence. Confronted with the sight of Voldemort drinking unicorn blood, Neville realizes the prophecy is not an abstract prophecy, it is a predator that knows his name. He grips his wand so hard his hand shakes, manages only a weak spark, and still steps between the cloaked figure and Harry. The loyalty is reflexive, the courage is quiet, the terror is absolute, and then the turning point arrives. In our original timeline, Neville stands in the Gryffindor common room, shaking, trying to stop Harry, Ron, and Hermione from risking their lives. Here, imagine the inversion. Neville is the one reaching for the portrait hole, frantic to protect the stone, because he has been told, endlessly, that his survival matters more than anyone's. Harry steps in front of him, not out of jealousy, but out of a hard-won understanding of how adults use children as shields. Dumbledore said you're to stay safe, Harry insists. You don't have to prove anything to them. Neville hesitates, hand on the wall, heart on the line. Does he obey the headmaster who built an entire school year around his protection, or the emerging moral compass that whispers protection without agency is just another prison? He takes one breath. In that breath, the divergence is finalized. What he chooses in the next heartbeat will determine whether this version of first year still ends in the dungeons, or never reaches the stone at all. Snape, Dumbledore, and the weight of a different prophecy. Neville's breath in the corridor is not taken alone. Offstage, two older men have been breathing for him for years. What happens when the prophecy's gravitational pull centers not on a Potter, but on a Longbottom? What fractures when the adult chess masters realize the chosen piece is not the boy with his father's face, but the heir of two Aurors they once fought beside? Here, we deconstruct a timeline where Snape and Dumbledore recalibrate around a different name. Start with Snape. In canon, his hatred is visually triggered every lesson. James's hair, James's smirk, James's son. Here, that psychological shortcut is gone. Neville walks into the dungeon bearing no resemblance to Snape's schoolyard tormentors, only the quiet, crushing expectation of being Frank Longbottom's boy. The core issue is mechanical. Without James to project onto, Snape is forced to confront a pure-blood chosen one whose parents did what he never did: stand publicly, consistently, against Voldemort. So the dynamic cools. The insults are rarer, sharper, more professional, aimed at competence rather than ancestry. He cannot sneer at our new celebrity without insulting the Aurors, whose torture still echoes through St. Mungo's corridors. Instead, his resentment redirects. Neville's intact bloodline, his grandmother's influence in the Wizengamot, the way the Order watches the boy with open, almost reverent concern. The subtext is brutal. Snape is risking his life for a child who will never know Lily, never mirror her eyes, yet still occupies the center of Dumbledore's plans. Now Dumbledore. With Neville as the prophesied child, the headmaster abandons some of the strategic distance he kept from Harry in the early years. The Longbottoms were original order. Augusta is not Petunia. There is no Muggle facade to hide behind, no cupboard to ignore. So he leans in. Earlier private meetings in his office. A careful, almost academic explanation of the prophecy before first year ends. A wand hand guided not only toward magic, but toward martyrdom. This is the grooming edge the books only fully reveal in Book 6, pulled forward. Dumbledore praises Neville's loyalty, his quiet courage, and then, with the same gentle tone, introduces the possibility that neither can live while the other survives might demand personal sacrifice. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated not by privet drive, but by the headmaster's calm insistence that heroism and death are neighboring rooms. Around them, the order adjusts. Moody drills Neville not as a promising student, but as an investment of collective grief. Frank's stance, Alice's wand work, distilled into a teenager. Lupin offers tea and stories of his parents, not to humanize James for Harry, but to anchor Neville in a lineage of resistance he is expected to extend. Harry, in this structure, becomes the friend of the chosen one, the boy in the second row, which brings us back to Snape's classroom. Imagine Neville in the front, cauldron steady, the room watching him for signs of greatness, while Harry botches a chop 2 tables back. Does Snape sabotage the boy who lived to puncture Longbottom arrogance that never truly existed? Or does he, in a grim echo of Lily's protection, overcorrect, shielding Neville with harsher grades, impossible standards, and subtle interventions that make failure politically impossible? The turning point arrives when Neville realizes that every adult gaze carries a ledger. For Dumbledore, he is prophecy fulfilled or wasted. For Snape, he is obligation without emotional payoff. If the headmaster is willing to raise a lamb for slaughter, does it matter whether that lamb is a Potter or a Longbottom? And once Neville begins to suspect that his destiny has been managed, not merely foretold, what will he do with that knowledge the next time he stands alone in a corridor and has to choose? Because the next choice will not just determine a stone, it will determine whether he still trusts the shepherds at all. The war inside Hogwarts, Neville's 5th year, and the DA. So what happens when that corridor choice scales up to an entire war? What does reluctant defiance look like when the entire state apparatus is aimed at crushing one boy? Year 5 answers both questions, and it does so with brutal efficiency. We fast forward the intervening years, not because they lack drama, but because a pattern has already crystallized. In the Chamber of Secrets, it is Neville, not Harry, who follows the trail of petrified students with a notebook full of herbology observations and a shaking wand. His duel with the basilisk is messy, improvised, and ends with him half convinced he survived by accident. In the rebuilt 3rd year timeline, the Dementors fixate on his memory of his parents' ward at St. Mungo's, forcing him to master the Patronus not as a flashy spell, but as a psychological life raft. The Tri-Wizard year, he enters only because the goblet names him, stumbles through the lake task by treating gillyweed as a research problem, and watches Voldemort's resurrection in the graveyard with a kind of stunned, horrified recognition. By the time we reach his OWL year, reluctant courage has hardened into something else. Competence. Scarred, unshowy competence. The core issue is mechanical. The Ministry cannot simply deny Voldemort's return. They must also dismantle the symbol who claims he saw it. So when Dolores Umbridge arrives, she does not merely represent bureaucratic overreach. She is a custom-built weapon designed to neutralize Neville Longbottom. Educational decree by decree, she criminalizes not just defensive magic, but the mythology of the boy who lived. The Daily Prophet runs thinly veiled character assassinations. Neville as hysteric, as attention seeker, as unstable child of institutionalized horrors. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated. The Longbottom name becomes a political fault line. This is where Dumbledore's army fractures and reforms. In canon, Neville is the quiet outlier in the back row. Here, he is the gravitational center. Hermione still designs the structure. Harry still brings tactical instincts from Quidditch and chaos, but Neville is the one who has been forced to duel adults since he was 11. He demonstrates shield charms that held against the killing curse once, drills disarming spells until wands fly from hands on reflex, and with a dry edge, explains that the point of a stunning spell is not elegance, it is survival. DA meetings become less a club and more a distributed trauma response unit. When the Department of Mystery's sequence arrives, the divergence is finalized. The prophecy orb does not speak in riddled ambiguity, it says his name. Neville Longbottom, born as the 7th month, dies. Marked as Voldemort's equal, the battle with the Death Eaters retains its chaotic architecture, but his duel with Bellatrix Lestrange acquires a different gravitational pull. She is not just the woman who destroyed his parents, she is the person who made the prophecy necessary. Every curse he throws is an argument against the idea that his entire reality reality was engineered around that night. And then, in Dumbledore's office, the turning point arrives. The orb's words are repeated in full. Either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Neville listens, jaw clenched, scar burning in time with every syllable. The subtext is brutal, his life reduced to a binary. He finally asks the question that has been building since that first corridor. Is that all I am to you? We cut before Dumbledore answers, because the real fracture is not in the prophecy, it is in how Neville decides to live with it, and the next decision he makes will not happen in an office or a prophecy hall, but in a castle under siege. The final battle, reforged. Neville's strengths, Voldemort's weakness. A castle under siege is not an office, and it does not care about prophecy clauses. By year 7 in this timeline, Neville is not the awkward boy searching for a misplaced toad. He is the gravitational center of a war. The room of requirement is no longer a hideout improvised by desperate teenagers. Under a prophesied leader who has had 7 years to prepare for this night, it is a functioning resistance headquarters, with mapped rotations, supply caches, and coded routes through portraits and secret staircases. The divergence is finalized in the sheer scale of his underground network. Neville's authority does not come from a scar, it comes from repetition. From being the one who always goes back for the first year hidden in a bathroom, his leadership structure is brutally simple. Shared risk. He eats in the same cramped corners, sleeps on the same cold floors, takes the Cruciatus alongside the others when they are caught. The subtext is brutal. He refuses to ask anyone to endure what he will not. Voldemort responds badly to this. In canon, his terror focuses on Muggleborns and Ministry control. Here, terrified of a pure-blood rival who carries the Longbottom name and the prophecy's weight, he pivots. He leans harder into terror against the old families, burning ancestral homes, forcing oaths from parents whose children are secretly sketching DA symbols into textbooks. What happens when the Dark Lord's own base starts to fracture? When a Parkinson heir whispers that Neville Longbottom stood between first years and the Carrow's wands. The psychological damage to Death Eater loyalty is immediate. The core issue is mechanical. Voldemort's power depends on fear and bloodline prestige. Neville's power depends on loyalty and lived proximity. So, the battlefield shifts. Neville weaponizes every inch of Hogwarts he has studied for years. Mandrakes are not homework. They are mobile sonic mines. Devil's Snare is coaxed into choke points, triggered on command. Venomous Tentacula guards evacuation routes, recognizing DA tokens. He pairs herbology with guerrilla tactics, sending fighters through vanishing cabinets and one-way passages that only he, the boy who spent years lost in corridors, has fully mapped. His alliances reflect this grounded dynamic. House elves coordinate food and first aid. Centaurs negotiate firing arcs over the grounds. Even the portraits serve as instantaneous communication relays. This is not the cult of the lone hero. This is distributed resistance, architected by someone who never believed he could win alone. And yet, the prophecy still demands a singular act. The Sword of Gryffindor moment arrives in the Great Hall, but its framing is different. Harry, freed from the burden of being the one, has already spent months dismantling Horcruxes in the shadows, moving through Gringotts, forests, and safe houses with a smaller profile. By the time Voldemort calls for Nagini's protection, only the snake and the man remain. Neville knows it. He has been briefed. This is not an impulsive swing. It is a conscious, rehearsed acceptance of his role. He pulls the sword from the sorting hat with full awareness that the prophecy is closing around him. He meets Nagini's eyes, then Voldemort's, and in that second, the boy who lived chooses to be the boy who ends it. Steel falls, magic screams, a soul fragment dies, which leaves the courtyard. In canon, Harry walks to his death in the forest, alone, carrying a secret. Here, the question is sharper. Does Neville attempt the same sacrificial gambit, offering his life to break the Elder Wand's allegiance and disarm death itself? Or does a boy raised on stories of horrors and attrition imagine a different ending? One where survival is not cowardice, but strategy? We deconstruct a timeline where that decision, made in the rubble and torchlight of a shattered school, determines whether this war ends with one body falling, or two. Would Neville still be Neville? But beneath that tactical question sits a quieter, more dangerous one. If Neville wins, who is left standing inside his own skin? Does a boy raised as a weapon against the Dark Lord ever get to be the anxious, plant-obsessed teenager we met in canon? Or is that version of Neville structurally annihilated before he can exist? In the original timeline, Neville's arc is slow, almost embarrassingly human. He forgets passwords, melts cauldrons, and spends entire years as a punchline. The turning point arrives not with a prophecy, but with a sword in a burning castle. Courage emerges as a revelation, not an expectation. In the re-engineered reality we deconstruct, that dynamic is inverted. From the moment Voldemort walks into the Longbottom home, instead of Godric's Hollow, Neville's bravery is not discovered. It is demanded. Every stumble is no longer comic relief. It is potential catastrophe. The core issue is mechanical. Remove the Dursleys, insert Augusta Longbottom, and a grieving order, and the structure of his childhood trauma changes. Canon Neville's insecurity grows from being underestimated and overcorrected. This Neville is overestimated and overexposed. He is the boy who lived, the symbol in every Daily Prophet photograph, the child whose scar is a public asset. Fame could easily calcify into arrogance. Yet psychologically, this is a boy who has watched his parents' minds destroyed in St. Mungo's. Failure, for him, is not a bad grade. It is reliving that ward. The subtext is brutal. He cannot afford to believe his own legend. So instead of swagger, we get vigilance. Instead of ego, we get a chronic fear of letting people down that deepens his empathy for anyone who feels small. He remembers what it is to freeze under pressure, even if the world never saw those moments. When a Muggle-born first year drops her wand in defense against the dark arts, this Neville does not sneer. He kneels, hands it back, and quietly shows her the grip that stopped his own shaking. Here, Harry becomes crucial. A non-chosen Harry understands invisibility with forensic precision. He knows what it is to be the extra boy in the room. Their friendship bends around that fracture. Harry can say the unsayable to the Chosen One, that it is permissible to be afraid. Hermione, meanwhile, respects the raw volume of work required to keep up when every misstep is front-page news. She does not worship a symbol, she organizes a study schedule, and teachers split along a fault line. McGonagall drills him as a student, while others address him as destiny with a timetable. Pattern interrupt. Imagine Snape. No James Potter, face to hate, no familiar script. Forced to teach the child whose survival cost him Lily's plan for Harry without giving him any cathartic target, his cruelty becomes cooler, more abstract, which paradoxically pushes Neville toward a harder, more deliberate resilience. In that context, Neville's greatest act of heroism may not be the final swing at Voldemort, but the decision, year after year, to remain gentle in a world that weaponized his childhood, to visit St. Mungo's and still choose tenderness, to lead Dumbledore's army and still care whether first years sleep. So picture the epilogue of this alternate timeline. Not a fallen legend, not a haunted horror, but an older Neville in a sunlit greenhouse, ink on his fingers, explaining Mimbleless Mimbletonia to bored 13-year-olds. After a youth defined by a prophecy he never chose, he selects the quietest possible rebellion, a life where his value is measured in seedlings, not scars. And that, more than any duel, is where the divergence is finalized. Your turn, choosing your own Neville, Longbottom. So where does that leave us? Standing in the greenhouse doorway, watching this alternate Neville brush dirt off his hands. What, exactly, have we rewritten when we deconstruct a timeline as fundamental as the prophecy itself? The answer is not just different battles or different scars. The answer is a different grammar of heroism. Step back for a moment and trace the fracture points. Voldemort walks into the Longbottom home instead of Godric's Hollow. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated in one night. The Longbottom attack creates a child raised not in a cupboard, but under the relentless gaze of a grieving war matriarch. Hogwarts becomes a pressure chamber rather than a refuge, its social structure bending around the boy who lived, who cannot quite believe the title belongs to him. The war that follows orbits not a prodigy, but a boy whose magic blooms under fear, loyalty, and slow, stubborn practice. Across this timeline, the core issue is mechanical. Change who Voldemort chooses, and you do not just swap out a protagonist, you alter the psychological load-bearing walls of the story. Snape's lessons cut differently when the Chosen One is not James Potter's mirror, but a quiet, trembling Longbottom. Dumbledore's strategies narrow around a child who needs scaffolding instead of mystery. Harry grows up adjacent to the war rather than at its center, his power undiluted, but his burden redistributed. The divergence is finalized when Neville's defining act is not a single swing of the sword, but a lifetime of returning to the fight even when he would rather be anywhere else. Underneath all of that, the subtext is brutal and simple. Who we become is never just prophecy, it is the collision between circumstance and choice. This Neville is proof that even when the world writes your name into a riddle about power, you can answer it with ordinary kindness, with the decision to stand in front of friends, not above them. He is not great because the prophecy crowned him. He is great because, over and over, he chooses to show up while terrified. So, your turn. Which Neville do you prefer? The canon late bloomer who steps forward in Deathly Hallows, or this boy whose entire childhood is a slow march toward a single line in the Department of Mysteries? Does making him the chosen one enhance his heroism, or does it dilute the miracle of that moment when a supposedly mediocre student pulls the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat? If you had to sort this Neville again, knowing this history, do you still place him in Gryffindor, or does his methodical resilience read as Hufflepuff to you? Push the timeline further in the comments. How does Snape's arc mutate when his daily antagonist is not Harry's face, but Frank and Alice's legacy? Does Draco idolize the famous Longbottom, or quietly resent a chosen one who refuses to play the aristocratic game? And what happens to Harry if he never carries the prophecy's burden? Does he become a freer version of himself? Or does the absence of that pressure stall his growth? If this kind of structural what if excites you, stay with this channel. We have not touched what happens when the prophecy points at both boys and the Dark Lord tries to control the outcome, or when a different child altogether fits those fatal conditions. Subscribe, share this with a friend who still underestimates Neville Longbottom, and tell us which fracture in the wizarding world you want to deconstruct next, because in the end, maybe the prophecy was never about power, maybe it was always about who stands up, even when they're scared, and if that is true for Neville, it might be true for the next name waiting on a dusty shelf in the Hall of Prophecy.